When you hear the word refugee, what is the first thing you think of?
Well, I guess war is the first thing that comes to mind. Other things are Syria, displacement, refugee camps, poverty.
Migrant, person in need, displaced person, human being.
Thank you to my housemates Sasha and Barbara for demonstrating the different types of associations you can have with a word. In this case, it was refugee, and they did it even in a corona-friendly way. As you can already read here, one type of association you can have is called paradigmatic, while the other is called syntagmatic. When you write the sentences below one another, paradigmatic associations, for example what Barbara mentioned as migrant or displaced person, are often displayed with this vertical axis. This marks words that occur at the same position in similar sentences, or you could also say that could be replaced by each other. Syntagmatic associations, on the other hand, for example when Sasha mentioned war or Syria, are displayed via this horizontal axis and are meant to refer to words that co-occur in the same sentence as a target word. So, with that short introduction of the most important concept of this work, welcome to my talk on the paper Detecting Different Forms of Semantic Shift in Word Embeddings via Paradigmatic and Syntagmatic Association Changes. This work was done in collaboration with Florian Lemmerich and Marco Strohmeier at the Computational Social Science and Humanities Group at RWTH Aachen University. I recently joined Utrecht University after completing this work in Aachen. Word embeddings, or if you look at it in a more general setting, language changes over time, or even between different communities. So here you have an example from the Hamilton et al. Paper, where they demonstrate a shift in the meaning of the word gay from the 1900s to the 1990s. The term originally referred to something like carefree or cheerful, as you can see here from the surrounding neighborhood words cheerful and so on, to a term referring to homosexuality, visible here in the terms surrounding it like homosexual or lesbian. The semantic shift problem is interested in exactly such meaning shifts. Given the word and several texts in a time-sensitive order, how did the word shift in meaning over time? So, why is this kind of question interesting? There's a linguistic aspect that is interested in exactly this question as a purpose in itself. Then there's a societal aspect that might be interesting. For example, imagine that you are interested in the word refugee and its meaning shift in 2015 with the European refugee crisis. If migrant is used increasingly as a synonym and therefore as a paradigmatic association to refugee, that might hint at an interesting societal change in the understanding of refugee. Also, it is interesting to look at this from a practical algorithmic perspective. For example, imagine that you want to use an embedding of a structure for a downstream task that is always up to date and needs some sort of thresholding to decide when to update it. So, for example, as a deciding factor for when to rerun the embedding algorithm. As change in the world is continuous, it might not make sense to update it at every moment my knowledge about the world shifts. This would also be relevant not only for word embeddings, but also for embedding algorithms making use of them. For example, for RDF graphs, a frequently used approach is generating text from graphs first and then calculating the word embeddings on that. In the beginning, I talked to you about paradigmatic and syntagmatic relations. Turns out they have been looked at for a long time in linguistics and even have been described to be the only types of relations possible between words. This is the intuition that you can only have horizontal and vertical relations between words. Additionally, there has been computational work on paradigmatic and syntagmatic relations, which says that both capture different and important semantic properties. There have been several approaches to validating proposed semantic shift measures. More recently, synthetic approaches have been increasingly used. They have not evaluated measures in their ability to detect different types of semantic shift. It has been shown that different measures of semantic shift detect different intensities of shifts for the same word. So, if you have, for example, measure A, which captures a semantic shift for refugee in 2015, but a second measure B, which does not, One question that can be posed here, apart from whether one of the measures is simply false, is whether they capture inherently different types of semantic shift. This leads me to one of the research questions we aim to answer with this work. How can we evaluate the sensitivity of measures to paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift? That is, evaluating them on different types of semantic shift. Apart from paradigmatic and syntagmatic association, word embeddings are also an important concept used in this work. Word embeddings are algorithms that take a text corpus as input, perform the often neural computation on it, and return a meaningful representation of words in a high-dimensional space. Meaningful here refers to the goal that the position of the words in the vector space somehow encodes their meaning. An intuition in relation to paradigmatic and syntagmatic association would be that the syntagmatic associations, that is, the words appearing directly next to a refugee, like for example home, determine the position in the embedding, while the paradigmatic associations, that is, words that can often replace refugee in a sentence, like for example displaced person, determine the nearest neighbors to a word in the embeddings. The word embeddings are typically used as an intermediate step for calculating the semantic shift on corpora. We worked with 3 different datasets, namely Amazon reviews, Reddit, which was the biggest corpus, and Wikipedia. We performed several so-called synthetic attacks. The term attack here denotes that we are, so to speak, attacking the semantic stability of a given corpus with changes that we artificially introduce. We chose to do synthetic attacks as opposed to other evaluation techniques, for example, human annotation or evaluation, as we could then make sure that only the type of change we are interested in is introduced in the corpus and there are no artifacts from other effects present. I'm going to tell you about 2 of the experiments. The first one here is the paradigmatic attack. If I change the closest paradigmatic associations of refugee artificially from displaced person to migrant from one year to the next, this should be encoded in the embedding trained on this text, and a paradigmatic measure should be able to detect this in turn. What I have drawn on the right with the expected embedding change title is just that, what we expected to be going on in the embedding. Just to illustrate that intermediate step, we only evaluate the performance of the measures, not the embedding algorithm itself. And the intuition behind this drawing is that the syntagmatic associations determine the positions in the embedding, while the paradigmatic associations determine the nearest neighbor cloud. For example, if you have the word refugee and this cloud of nearest neighbors, that is the words that are the closest paradigmatically related words to refugee, then if you introduce a paradigmatic shift, this nearest neighbor cloud should change as well. For the syntagmatic attack, we basically use the same idea. That is, we change the syntagmatic associations in the original text. If you are observant, you will have already noticed that it says paradigmatic and syntagmatic attack, and not only syntagmatic attack on the right. This is because, as you see in the expected embedding change, the nearest neighbors for refugee also shift when the co-occurrence, that is the syntagmatic associations, and with that the position in the embedding shifts. Therefore, the nearest neighbors, and with that, the paradigmatic associations might also be different after introducing the syntagmatic shift. Let's look at some results. There are these 2 semantic shift measures that I will be displaying for this section. One is the local neighborhood, or LN, and the other is the global semantic displacement measure, or SD. Here we see how well these measures can recover the 160 paradigmatically changed words. The dotted line is displaying the expected performance of a perfect or ideal paradigmatic measure. As a result, for the paradigmatic attack, LN is detecting a majority of the paradigmatic shifts, while the SD is not detecting any of them. For the paradigmatic and syntagmatic attack, suddenly the SD is detecting all of the shifted words. So, assuming that paradigmatic and syntagmatic shifts are the only shifts that can happen, as they are the only word relations that there are, the semantic displacement would be measuring syntagmatic shift, while the local neighborhood is probably rather measuring paradigmatic shift. Let us assume that the local neighborhood measure is the best paradigmatic and the global semantic displacement is the best syntagmatic measure, and look at some examples from the different corpora. We are now looking at the word Kindle on the Amazon corpus. A measure value of 1 here means that there is no change, and 0 means that there is a significant change between the years. What is displayed here are consecutive values. That is, for a given year, this is always comparing the meaning to the previous year. Apparently, we have this dent here for Kindle on Amazon in 2007 in both the syntagmatic and the paradigmatic measure curve. And coincidentally, the Amazon ebook reader Kindle was introduced in 2007. Here you can see the embeddings for that. Gray dots are marking the nearest neighbors for Kindle in the year 2006 and blue ones in the year 2007. You can see in the embeddings that Kindle undergoes a shift in the position as well as the nearest neighbors. That is, displaying the expected behavior for paradigmatic as well as syntagmatic shift. Before, it is in the neighborhood associated with the word Kindle, and after you can see that it is among electronic devices, like ebook. When we again think about the paradigmatic and syntagmatic associations in these vertical and horizontal axes in a text, it makes sense that both axes undergo shift, as we will be talking differently about Kindle in the same sentence. Also, there are different terms that could replace Kindle in a sentence. We have seen paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift can occur together, but can they also occur separate from one another? Indeed, apparently we can have syntagmatic without paradigmatic shift. Here we have the word 50 out of the Amazon corpus, where there is a shift in 2012 on the syntagmatic measure, but no shift in the paradigmatic measure. Let's look at the embedding. In the illustration here, only the 5 nearest neighbors to 50 in the given year are displayed, and they stay the same, namely 30, 40, 20, and so on. Although it's not visible in the illustration here, and this is a side product of the dimensionality reduction, the nearest neighbors also remain in the same order as before, but the position of 50 in the embedding shifted. What I did now is I typed in 50 on Amazon, and well, the first result that you get back is 50 Shades of Grey. And coincidentally, 2012 is the year that it was published in the print version and was being sold a considerable amount of times on Amazon that year. When we again think about the paradigmatic and syntagmatic associations in these vertical and horizontal axes in a text, it makes sense that only the horizontal syntagmatic axis undergoes shift. This is because the probability distribution for the word appearing directly after 50 will be skewed towards shades. On the other hand, 50 will still be used in a position in a sentence that is typical for a number, and is therefore not undergoing a paradigmatic shift. In conclusion, we looked at different types of semantic shift, that is paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift. We found one measure each that apparently captures the concept well, and we have seen that they are not the same. With this work, we contribute an operationalization of paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift, or rather the evaluation thereof, and with that a more nuanced understanding of semantic shift. There are some limitations mentioned in our paper, but let me here put the focus on just 2 of them. First, you might say that semantic shift is not the same as paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift. And more interestingly, paradigmatic or syntagmatic shift is no subset of semantic shift. With our definitions of semantic shift, we would, for example, capture seasonal changes of the word Christmas in December versus March, which are arguably not really displaying semantic shift. But on the other hand, might also be interesting to explore. Second, we looked at introducing paradigmatic and syntagmatic shift in the data and looked at whether the measures could pick up on that. But we did not, or at least not to a well enough extent, look at whether measure shift is always going on because of a paradigmatic or syntagmatic change. Future work, or work that is enabled by what we did, is, for example, the informed thresholding of embeddings. One might want to think about what kind of semantic shift should be important for the text or the knowledge structure they are working with, and then, depending on that, update the embedding. What is also interesting to look at is inferring the reasons of semantic shift, which might be an easier task if you know from the get-go whether it is a rather paradigmatic or syntagmatic shift. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you at the live Q&A session at the International Semantic Web Conference 2020 or online under the provided link.